Good evening, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Very good. I was told by Walter Keane I have to talk really loud. If you don't know me, I'm Bub Saunders. I grew up here in Surry. I'm standing here just looking around, think of all the memories here when I was growing up. We used to play basketball in here. I can remember practicing, we'd have a wood stove going, and most of the time the damper wouldn't work. We'd have to open up all the windows so it was colder than it would have been if we hadn't started the fire. And when I was growing up, my dad was on the planning board, and down the road, Charlie Leaf, he was on the planning board too, and we used to have meetings in that room. And my friend Billy and I used to play basketball there. And they'd stick their head out every once in a while and tell us to be quiet because they couldn't hear themselves think of the meeting. I was thinking, there was another time we had a town meeting here, and I got into fisticuffs, and I remember I was quite young, and some of those benches flipped over and people were rolling on the ground and kind of threw them out the front door, and I was like, wow, this is town meeting? But anyways, like I said, if you don't know me, my name's Bub Saunders. I know a lot of people here. Everybody's aged, I guess I have too. I came in to talk about my family, but more importantly about my grandfather, Ellis Saunders. It is kind of fortuitous that tonight I'm talking to you because tomorrow, the 17th, would have been my grandparents' 102nd wedding anniversary. So, like I said, everybody calls me Bob except bill collectors. They call me Wilbur. I was given my dad's first name, Wilbur, and my grandfather's first name, Ellis, so Wilbur Ellis Saunders. I got my dad and my grandfather's name. When I was growing up, my sister Ethel, who's somewhere in here,
Right over there.
she couldn't pronounce Wilbur, so it came out Bub, and that's how I got Bub. Thank goodness, because Wilbur the Big haunted me all through grammar school. I've never done this before. I've never written a book before, and I've never done this, so if I'm rambling on, just kind of give me a yell to get on with it, and I'll do my best. I just wanted to read out the preface to my book. I thought it'd be a good way to start on why I wrote the book. By all accounts, my grandfather, Ellis Saunders, was a well-liked and respected man. I knew my grandfather for a short time during his life. He passed away a little over a month after my 5th birthday in 1968. My memories of him are hazy and have likely been modified by others. He was a war hero, husband, father, grandfather, and friend to many. In 2006, shortly after my wife had a very major cancer surgery, I began to delve into my family's history as a periodic escape from the pressures of life. I traced many different lineages within my family and put together a loose leaf book for my family members for the Christmas of 2012. When my mom passed away in 2019, followed by my dad in 2020, many emotions and realizations flowed through my head for nearly 2 years. Family conflicts, legal buffoonery, and the loss of my folks often dragged my spirits to low that I had never experienced in my life. On October 2020, I went to my folks and brought back to my home my grandfather's 1968 Chevy. In January of 2021, I began restoration with a co-worker at his garage. The truck was stripped of the frame, paint removed, repainted, the engine and transmission removed, and in June the truck was put together, ready for the great reveal. The restoration was therapeutic for my self-imposed depression and brought me to a better place in my life. And some of the stuff I got here was pretty cool. I went over to the Blue Hill Fairgrounds to the Sedgwick car show, and I won Best in Show with my grandfather's truck back in 2022, so I had to bring that along, so I had to brag. And his dog tags are hanging off it, and the pocket watch he bought in France during World War I. Got his World War I uniform here, picture of him in World War I, and then the original registration that he got when he bought the truck. So, I don't want to bore you too much with history, but I want to kind of talk about how my family came to be in New England. In 1622, my great ×7 grandfather, Lieutenant John Saunders, helped settle the failed West Augusta plantation in present-day Weymouth, Mass. After 7 generations moved around New England and into New Brunswick, my great times 4 grandfather, William Saunders, along with his son, my great times 3 grandfather, Edward, settled in Orland in 1790. One of Edward's sons was my great-great-grandfather, Darius Lawrence Saunders. Darius settled in West Surry in 1838. Was it 1828 we were just talking about, or was it 1838?
28.
I thought it might be a good number, it didn't work out. He was buried in the West Surry Cemetery with his wife Nancy. I looked up and I remember taking that sign down when I was younger, when they put the new sign up. I used to get, Billy and I used to get stuck raking and mowing that stupid cemetery, the openings are horrible. I remember one time we thought it'd be really clever. We decided we were going to go out to the fire department, which is out there in the Toddy Quadro back then. We got some Indian pumps and decided to burn the leaves, and we set the fence on fire. And the fire went out into the woods, and we got it out, but we also got a new job of putting up a new fence and painting the new fence white. So I guess we made work for ourselves. See, I get sidetracked talking. Darius brought an important skill to my family, the lumbering trade, or more precisely, the art of sawing lumber and making shingles. He learned this skill along with my great-grandfather Hollis Ellis Saunders at the Henry Dunbar Mill at the foot of Toddy Pond in Orland. Holly and his wife, Mary Elizabeth Cunningham, were married in 1868 and moved up on the Cunningham Ridge in 1881. About this time, Hollis purchased around 300 acres of woodland in Blue Hill around the headwaters of Toddy Pond. In 1890, Hollis bought what they call the Snapdragon Sawmill and set it up in Surry by Sandy Brook on Toddy Pond. Back at that time, they were talking about putting a railroad from Ellsworth over the Bucksport across the Narrows between, well, I call it First Toddy, everybody calls it Third Toddy, the head of the pond and Middle Toddy. There's people in Orland like to call it First Toddy. I call the head of the pond First Toddy. Anyways, so that's why he bought the sawmills to cut railroad ties. And then in 1900, he bought a larger steam engine. I talk about this in the book a little bit. He set it up on Cunningham Ridge next to the homestead, and that old steam engine is still sitting there. Notes here. The lumber trade was the legacy that my grandfather was born into on February 2nd, 1895. When my grandfather was born, his father Hollis was 48 and Mary was 42. They would have 2 more children, believe it or not. The last born in 1898, when Hollis was 51 and Mary was 45. Mary's first child was 1868, so you think about it, there was 13 children in the family, and 2 of the 3 died young, and my grandfather's twin sister died of childbirth. So she was pretty much pregnant for 30 years, if you think about it. But the whole idea was they needed people to work on the farm and work in the sawmill, and so they had a lot of children. Anyway, that's kind of the background from my grandfather. We all have moments in our life to define us, I guess. Probably the one that defined my grandfather the best was his service in World War I. Other than that, married my grandmother in 1923, and obviously the birth of my dad in 1933. By the time my grandfather returned from France on June 19th, which is almost close to this date, June 19th, 1919, his mom and dad were living in a homestead all by themselves. Hollis is 72 and Mary is 66. Upon his return, my grandfather suffered what we call PTSD today. From what I was told by my grandmother and my aunts and uncles, his parents, Hollis and Mary, were woken up many nights from nightmares that he had from his experiences. The homestead gave my grandfather security, which I think he really needed, and grounded him so he had a place to live and feel safe, which unfortunately some veterans don't have. After he came home, some of his brothers they got together and they tried to make the sawmill business work, but it was already in decline by the time my grandfather got home. In about 1919, my grandfather met Ethel Lee Davis, and so were her brothers. Her dad, George Wilbur Davis, that's where Wilbur comes from, was from Deer Isle and had bought a piece of land between Hollis's lots and Blue Hill. Together they tried to revive the sawmill in 1917 while my grandfather was in World War I. By 1920, there was large lumbering businesses around, and that little small family-owned company couldn't make it. So they decided it might be a better way to make money. And this part of the story my dad never wanted me to talk about, but maybe he's listening now. About this time, the Davis clan down on Deer Isle, Maine already had prohibition, so they had access to shipping, and they had illegal booze on the island. So they decided it would be a good idea to bring the illegal booze up from Deer Isle to the Blue Hill Woodlot, out by the Turkey Farm Road and across the head of Toddy Pond. By the time my grandmother graduated from college and married my grandfather in 1923, the new business had become fairly successful. The sawmill pretty much stopped sawing logs, and they went to pulpwood because the paper mill was in Bucksport. And they were able to use the hide the alcohol in the pulpwood, take it to the mill to get it to the railhead to move it out throughout the area. So, the Great Depression of the 30s and the repeal of Prohibition changed my grandfather's life. He had to find a new occupation, obviously. In the 1920s, my great-grandfather, George Davis, he was the road commissioner on Deer Isle. He built the causeway. If anybody's been between Little Deer Isle and Big Deer Isle, he built that. And my grandfather helped him in the 20s, and so he kind of learned the road building trade, so to speak. And under the New Deal, he began building roads around Hancock County as a foreman. And he always made sure the people in West Surry got first bid on some of the work. He made sure his neighbors had work. And I was told by my cousin Phil Cunningham it was $1 a day. So it was a lot of money, I guess, during the Depression. And then in the middle of this, my dad was born on May 17, 1933. Can everybody hear me? Am I talking loud enough? My grandparents had struggled through many miscarriages for 10 years when their only child was born. So they protected my dad pretty much because, you know, they had tried and tried to pass on their legacy to someone. So when my dad was born, it was very important to them. In 1936, my grandfather purchased about 250 acres from his Uncle Charles Saunders in Surry to link the homestead in Surry to the Blue Hill Woodlot. That road goes down through to the butts on the Blue Hill town line. He did this so his 3-year-old son would have a better chance at success. Then as the world began to stumble towards war again, my grandfather had what they call the nervous breakdown. In 1940, his nightmares started coming back, and he spent 4 months in a hospital in Bangor. My dad remembers it. He thought it was almost like an adventure. He was 7 years old, and he remember taking the Bonton ferry across from Brewer to Bangor to see his dad. Then through the 40s and 50s and into the early 60s, my grandfather continued working on road projects in the summer and cut pulpwood in the winter to support himself and his family. And then jump ahead a little bit. My grandfather never owned anything truly new in his life. And then in 1968, they bought a Chevrolet pickup, and I want to read another excerpt from the book, if you don't mind. And you can read it too if you buy the book later on. If I miss something, you can correct me. This is kind of long-winded, but I'm going to go through it here. On a snowy day in late December 1967, my grandmother Saunders decided it was time for my grandfather to get a new truck. This new truck would not be like the other new trucks they always used. She wanted him to have a true new truck. My grandmother felt it was time for that my grandfather needed to be rewarded for all the sacrifices he had made during his life for family and friends. So on that day, they went to the Chevrolet dealership on Water Street in Ellsworth. My grandmother must have been quite sure that they were going to buy a truck since my great-uncle Ad gave them a ride to the dealership and dropped them off. My grandmother told my grandfather to pick out the truck that he wanted. After looking over the lot, he chose a 1968 Chevrolet C10 short bed step-side pickup. The color was what the salesman called Hawaiian blue. While my grandfather looked over the truck with the salesman, my grandmother walked across the street to the Union Trust Bank to get money. My grandparents had no airs about them. So when my grandmother walked into the bank, she wore farm clothes. A piece of wire held the purse closed as the clasp was broken. When she put her savings book down and said she needed to take out some cash to buy a new truck. To be sure, $2,300 was quite a bit of money in 1967. The teller looked at her and told her he could only give her a check. She demanded cash. The bank manager overheard the conversation between my grandparents and the teller. He knew my grandparents very well and came out to the lobby. He apologized for the inconvenience, and he gave her cash in an envelope. She undid the wire clasp in her purse and placed the envelope back into the purse and redid the clasp. She then walked back across the street to the Chevrolet dealership. My grandfather had fully decided he wanted the truck and was smoking his pipe and talking with the salesman. My grandparents walked into the office and paid cash for the only new vehicle my grandfather ever owned. When I was restoring the truck in 2021, I found the original registration neatly folded in the owner's manual, and that's up here, and the owner's manual is down there. So the Chevy truck, when I was growing up, that was the truck that I used. I was looking out, like I said, I saw people. Paul Farley's here. I remember coaching him in Little League. I can't believe he's not a little kid anymore. I remember toting kids around the back of the old Chevy to ball games up to Waltham and all over the place. The Blue Hill Fair, we had tournaments at Blue Hill Fairground. One summer I had my Little League team be my blueberry rakers. They raked blueberries down on Newberry Neck. And I think it was quite illegal, so I made them all my brothers because they were too young to officially rake blueberries. But no, I had a lot of, it's in the book, I had a lot of adventures with the truck, but I just remember going around working the area. John, where's John? Talking here, I worked at his house. I remember Ed McGarrett back then, I tore out the lath and plaster ceiling and hauled all the lath and plaster over the old Surry Blue Hill dump up on the Turkey Farm Road. But anyways, I thought everybody knew my mom and dad quite well, so I thought it's not quite in the book, so I thought I'd talk a little bit about a couple stories about my dad people might not have heard. Back in 1899, Henry Dunbar's sawmill burned. Yeah, say that 5 times real fast. Burned down in Orland, and so my great-grandfather went down and rescued it, and they rebuilt it. And that planed lumber at the sawmill. My grandfather used it. My dad used it. I think it's pretty cool to think my great-grandfather Darius, and then Hollis, Ellis, my dad and me, all 5 of us had actually put our hands on that and used it to work with. And now it kind of sits defunct over it, across from my mom and dad's house on the other end of the field. But when I was growing up, anybody who knew my dad knew he was very particular. Some might say he had OCD. We built a camp in Surry. We called it the Big Red Camp. That was the first camp we built. And he wanted to make sure every 2x4 was 2 inches by 4 inches. And every 2x6 was 2 inches by 6 inches. And he built these little jigs. And that planer was a horrible planer. It was so dangerous. It had 2 spinning knives. And it definitely did not pass child labor law. And anyways, I'd stand, my sister Ethel, and Mary probably too, we'd take turns standing on the end of that plane with chips flying at us. And,
No safety glasses.
yeah,
No.
and I just remember him yelling to hold it up, hold it up, hold it up. You know, you get a 20-foot piece of wood coming through, and you want to make sure it stayed 6 inches. And if you wiggle a little bit, it's going to gouge it. Then you tell you messed it up or whatever. But he got his 2x6s and his 2x4s, and we had a sawmill over there at the time, and we sawed all the lumber from the lot. We built that camp pretty much with, pine and spruce we cut down on the property. And then in 1990-91, when we built the camp in Blue Hill, Dad decided that he was going to go to the hardware store or the lumber yard. He didn't care if it was not 2x4. He called it 1 3/4 by 2 3 3/4. But my dad, he was very particular about. He wanted to make sure everything was just right on that camp, and maybe that's why I don't quite do things to perfection, because I used to drive crazy. But he built that camp for my mom and his family, and we had many good times down there. And then another story of my dad. It was 1996. I was working for SW Qual Engineering, and they were building. Yeah, it was an elderly housing project over on South Street in Blue Hill. I can't remember the name of it now. Huh?
Harbor View?
Packer Ridge. Packer Ridge.
Yeah.
And there was a big controversy over groundwater flow and all that. So I was down there for the planning board for the developers. And at the same time, Dad and I were going to be there because we got a permit from Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps, I can't remember everybody, to blow up a beaver dam at the head of Toddy Pond. So we could put a road across, because we hadn't cut lumber on the other side. We had an old wood cutter, and we hadn't gone on the other side of that pond. It hadn't been cut probably in 100 years. So anyways, we had the meeting. Everybody's fighting about Parker Ridge, and they called a little break for everybody to walk around and calm down a little bit. And then the head of the planning board looked at my dad and said, how's your thing, Wilbur? And he said, I'm all good. They looked it all over, and they hit the gavel and approved us blowing the beaver dam up. And all these people come running back in because they thought they'd approved the Parker Ridge development. They were all running back together. And Dad got out of there, but I had to stay. So anyways, we got permission, and it was a March day. And we went to the head of the pond, and he had the blaster, and the blaster had twisted his knee or something, so he handed me the blasting caps and a case of dynamite and a crowbar. I waded out through the marsh and poked holes in the dam where he told me to, and put whatever fuse on and wired it all up. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought sure I was going to get blown up. And so we got it all wired up, and there was quite a bit of dynamite in the beaver dam. And we ran the wire across, and we forgot to get the long wire, so we were just barely in the woods. And Dad had his camera out, and he wanted to get pictures of it. And Bob said, why don't you just touch it off over? Don't worry about the pictures. Touch this off, you don't want to be out there. So my dad was determined to get a picture. So Bob hit the button. There was a huge explosion. The dam went up in the air, and then it set off another explosion from all the muddy swamp gas. I mean, it was a huge fireball. My dad's out there taking pictures. And Bob says, Jesus Christ, well, we get under the tree. You're going to get killed, and Margie will kill me. So we got Dad back under, and there was pieces of beaver dam everywhere. And we had the old bag phones back then, and Dad called Mom. And he said, yeah, the beaver dam got blown up. She goes, I know, I could feel the windows rattle in the house up here on Penn Ridge. So I guess we probably put too much dynamite in the beaver dam. But we got the road across, got culverts in, and within 3 weeks, the dam was back. So it didn't really bother the beavers too much. So that's some of the stories about my dad. I don't know if anybody has any questions about my book. I didn't want to just read out of the book to you, but yeah.
Yeah, Lucy Leaf.
I know Lucy.
Billy, I know you guys pal around a lot. I was much older. But a couple of questions about the you know, that railroad that was supposed to go across Toddy Pond.
Yeah.
And you said there's a steam engine around there somewhere?
The steam engine my great-grandfather bought.
Oh,
There was a family over, well, there was a hotel on Tenny Hill in Blue Hill, and a family from New York City bought it, and they didn't want the steam engine anymore. They used it to power electric lights, so they hauled it over in 1900 across the head of Toddy Pond and up on the I can imagine with oxen. I can't imagine how they did it. There's a picture of it in the book. If you buy the book, you can see a picture of it. But it's still sitting there. In fact, if I can get it going, my nephew Brian and I are going to move it down to my camp in Blue Hill, and I want to set it up and clean it off and paint it up, because it's just sitting there, you know. It'd be kind of nice to have it sitting there so people could see it. But yeah, so that's the Snapdragon sawmill that he had down by Sandy Brook. That's what he got that for, was to buy. It cut 6 foot long. That's all it could cut, was 6 foot long logs, and he was going to do it. He was hoping to, you know, be able
what
to.
is Sandy Brook? What do you call, I mean,
Sandy
there's
Brook.
Puzzle Brook down there, but is it Sandy Brook?
Sandy Brook's down by the Big Red Camp, the boathouse, the ice house there, my mom and dad's.
Yeah, around your area there.
Yeah, right down by Sandy Beach.
Okay, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So,
And then this sawmill that you referred to, I think maybe a couple of them, but the earlier one, was that located closer to where your family lives now? Or
it was down at the mouth of Sandy Brook, because what
Oh.
they did was they cut logs up the head of the pond and brought them down on the ice, and they floated them in the lake. So, in fact, I got it up to my house, the top of the boiler to that old Snapdragon sawmill. My wife uses the planter. So,
You might have to show us all that stuff.
I think it might be in the book, actually.
Well, that chain bug is still down there that they used to haul.
Yeah, they had a chain for the smokestack,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and also for log booms to hold the logs into the pond. But, yeah, it's not down there anymore. There used to be an ice house. And Harvey Saunders, down there, you know Harvey, he had an ice house too, and so he stored ice, and my great-grandparents stored ice, and they used the shavings from the sawmill, you know, to preserve the ice in the summer. So when I was growing up, there was a boathouse, obviously. Now it's torn down now. But, yep. So, Harvey actually at one point took my great-grandfather's sawmill down to his house.
Wow.
And in the 1930s, and then he bought his own sawmill, and they moved it back up onto Cunningham Bridge in the early 40s. And my dad and grandfather tried to cobble it together with an old Buick engine, and I don't think they saw very many logs with it. But anyways,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah.
Alice Saunders, I knew him well when I
Yeah.
was very young. And
You were lucky, I didn't get to know him very well.
what'd you say?
You're lucky, I didn't get to know him very well.
Oh, yeah, well, he was a friend of my grandfather, Al Ball.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
And I knew he was in World War I
Yeah.
as a soldier, but I wasn't aware of when did he go into the army and when did he come out? And what did he do over there in France? Or?
Well, you can read the book.
Oh, yeah, I would.
No, just teasing. So when he got drafted, I think he got his draft notice in August of 1917. And he went down to, well, it's called Camp Devens, it's Fort Devens,
Yeah.
Massachusetts. And he got down there, and he was going into the artillery. And they found out that he knew all about steam engines. He knew how to run a steam engine, because that's what he did
Yeah.
for my great-grandfather. And so they decided to pull him out of artillery, and they put him into Army Corps of Engineers, and he went over there to run sawmills.
Oh.
And one of the misnomers that his mom and dad had was he really wasn't that safe, because when he was there, he actually had to go and rebuild trench lines after the bombings and stuff. So he saw stuff that people really shouldn't see.
Yeah.
And talk about in the book, there was one time there the Germans came across and they were trying to rebuild an entrenchment, and well, before they could do it, they had to remove the bodies of all the Canadian soldiers that were killed. And they basically were hand-to-hand combat with the German infantry as they came into the trench lines. So, yeah, it was, everybody thinks running the sawmill would be safe, but it really wasn't. So, but, and then after the war ended, he thought he was coming home, and they split up the company that he was with, and some went, built Persian Stadium, and others, including my grandfather, went and picked up bodies in no man's land. They got the gross duty
They
of
built Pershing stations, what's that?
the Persian Stadium in France, in Paris. They
Oh,
built the stadium.
yeah.
And so he and German prisoner of wars had to go clean up the people.
That must have been
you know,
pretty
no
awful.
man's land. It must have been.
Yeah,
I couldn't find it,
yeah.
but I have a flare gun.
So he was in until what, 1919 or something?
He came home June 1919.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came
The war
over.
ended November 8, 1918.
Yeah.
Yep.
So June, he was there for a little bit.
He stayed there for 6 more months.
Yeah.
Not so good.
I'm sure he was glad to be home.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Well, he actually was offered a job by the Army Corps to go build dams out in western New York, but he declined. He just wanted to go home.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't bring it. I was looking for it tonight. It's in my gun safe somewhere, but it's a very pistol, a flare gun. And my grandfather found it when they were cleaning up the bodies. It's a British flare gun to shoot when you're in battle. And he wrote home to my great-grandfather that he got a cannon for his birthday. It's a flare gun like this big around.
Yeah.
It was kind of a joke. It was a cannon, but it was, you know. But I wish I brought that. I forgot to bring it, and I forgot his helmet too. But there is his uniform. There's a picture of him here. And I will say, before I forget, I just talking about my dad stories. See, we're getting old. My knees are killing me. But on my mom's side, I brought this down. My mom's French. Part of her family was French. My dad never let her forget it. But in here's an article that I wrote for La Pelletier. It's up in Quebec, and if you speak Francais, you can read it in French. If you don't, it's an English version. So feel free, anybody, if you want to read this. It's about my grandmother, my mom's mom, and her life story, which wasn't the greatest story in the whole world. But I was kind of glad to get that story out there, because if you don't write stuff down, no one's going to remember, right? So feel free, I'll leave this up if anyone wants to kind of read the story about my grandmother, Pelletier. So, any other questions? Yep. Oh, Walter.
What about, one thing I couldn't make out of the book was all that land, what was the access to it from Blue Hill? A lot of your woodland was in Blue Hill,
Yeah.
and how do you access that?
Well, that was one of the reasons my grandfather bought the Surry land, to link it to the ridge, Cunningham Ridge. When my great-grandfather bought land, people didn't really worry too much about property boundaries. You kind of used everybody's land or whatever, as long as you didn't abuse it. But things started changing, so I think my grandfather thought if we were going to keep access to Blue Hill, he had to buy that lot from Charles Saunders. And Charles was pretty old at the time, so, and my grandfather, I think, paid $250, which is a lot of money in 1936, to have, for that, my dad to have that access. But now, the Surry, what do they call it, the Surry Forest Heritage Trust or whatever, we actually have an easement into that, across from the Toddy Pond Road into that as well. So there's two accesses into it. But,
One other thing, you had Wilbur Saunders, who was a great friend of mine, is Ed Saunders' son. It's actually Ed Saunders' grandson. Francis was Ed's son,
Yep,
and Walter was the grandson,
right,
you know.
yep, yeah, Brad's Walter's son, he's a little Ethel, is he your age? Brad? Yeah, wherever you are, yeah. Yeah, Brad sent me a couple stories that I didn't put in the book either. There's some
Did a great
colorful
job.
stories about my grandfather.
Did
and
a
my
great job
great-granddad.
of all the dates and all the movement of the family. I was really impressed in the book, how all the historical stuff you had in there.
Yeah,
It really was interesting and great.
I appreciate that. I try to break it up into decades. Each chapter is like a 10-year, almost, so to speak. But it's hard to try to make that all weave together and make it readable. And I had stories in my head in my grandmother's diary, which was very helpful. Stories and different versions of stories, and then trying to put two and two together to see what the truth really was. And you know, maybe some of the stuff I wrote wrong. I don't know. I tried my best to make sure it was legible, readable, and interesting. So, yeah.
He might have answered that. I didn't quite pick up the whole question. Harvey Saunders, you mentioned, Harvey Gertrude. So, and they were kind of icons, right, in our community.
Right.
Yeah, but what was your relation to, so many Saunders around, I couldn't keep it straight. Is your relation to them or your father?
Harvey was my great-grandfather's, no, I'm wrong. Harvey's father was Granville Saunders. Granville was my grandfather's brother. So Harvey and Oscar Saunders was Granville's sons. So Harvey Gertrude didn't have any children. Oscar, Buddy, probably everybody knows Buddy Saunders, and he has the car repair shop over in Ellsworth. So yeah, that's how I'm related to Harvey. And I was just looking over here on the Civil War register. John Saunders, he's buried out here in the village cemetery. Harvey called me down one night and he gave me John's musket. So I actually have John's musket from the Civil War, which is kind of neat. It's not shootable. No, I didn't bring that down.
That's from a member of the Young family.
Yeah, the one I have is not quite in good shape, but I think it got played with by kids over the years. But, no, Harvey, when I was growing up, Harvey either went to Sandy Beach up on my folks' land or Harvey's Beach, those are the places to go swimming. So, I can remember when Billy split his head open diving off the rock. You don't remember that? I remember that. It's a good thing they weren't sharks.
Good thing he survived.
Huh?
Good thing he survived.
If you knew Billy, hit the head wasn't going to bother him.
I'll tell him that.
I saw him last weekend. Yeah, shoot. But, well, Harvey and Gertrude were good people. So, but I actually have Harvey's journals from when he was a firewood up on Blue Hill Mountain. Talks about different days and, just going up on the mountain. It's kind of interesting. But they were going to be kind of tossed, so I grabbed them, and my wife's like, oh my God, another tote. I got a storage locker full of stuff.
Is that different from Gertrude's diaries that she kept every year? Because
Yeah.
I can't find those.
I have, in my house somewhere, I have a scrapbook that Gertrude put together during World War II of your dad.
Yeah,
Anything written about your dad was in that scrapbook.
I know, I remember.
And I tell him, Billy, it's a picture of Harvey and Gertrude's son they adopted and your dad. And I just got to find that scrapbook. It's probably in the storage locker somewhere. But,
We should think about giving it to the Historical Society.
if I can find it.
No, all that material you have for the book,
Yeah.
when you pass on, leave it to the Historical Society.
Yep.
There might be somebody that
Yep,
So it's-
went on it.
Yeah,
I was down to Camp Devens, and I told them I had my grandfather's uniform, and I was wondering if they would like it someday, and then they took me into the museum. They have so many uniforms that it was amazing to see.
yeah,
All the World War I memorabilia from that time frame.
yeah.
It was interesting to go down and see it. One of the other things I forgot was my little shoebox that had my grandfather's postcards from World War I and from all the places he visited in France. He went around, and I never saw them, I don't think, until sometime in the 1980s. And it struck me as odd because when I went to France in high school, the French club, I did the same thing. I had one of these little postcard books that I had, but the pictures are in color, his were in black and white. But, any else questions? No? Did I talk too long?
No.
Okay.